until it shows that is recording. Does it show recording? Now it says, okay, recording has started. So welcome everyone to another MS Excel Toronto Meetup group session. We have a session today about Excel for Mac. So very excited about that because this is a topic that is not covered a lot, and it does become challenging sometimes when we have to deal with Excel for Mac. But before that, let me give you just a couple of announcements very quickly. As you see, and as you know, we are using Teams. You can raise your hand, you know the deal. You can use the chat to ask questions or make comments. During the session, you will be able to ask your questions as well. If you have any trouble with accessing the chat or anything like that, you can try logging out and coming back in, because sometimes that just does the trick and solves the problem. Okay, so this is what I just explained about any trouble with accessing the chat. This session will be recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. For those of you who are new, welcome to the group. Welcome everyone who is joining the session live today as well, or watching the recording later. On our YouTube channel, we post the video a couple of days after the session, and everyone who answered yes to the session, who registered, will also receive an email with a link for the video and also any possible files if Mike is sharing any files with us today, just in case. And also other notes about Excel. I always add a couple of little things to the email. So our next session will be on April 26th. We will have Eric O'Ham, and he will be talking about micro automations in Excel. Micro automations, Excel's little secret. If you can join the session, I highly recommend, because Eric has a very unique way of working with Excel, and I'm sure there will be a lot of surprises for us in that session. I'm very excited about this topic as well. If you follow for us, you probably already saw this chart here. If not, I recommend you follow him. He is an MVP, and on LinkedIn, he always posts the calendar for several meetup groups around the world. And if you want to take a quick snapshot of that, we still have a couple of them in the next few days. So take advantage of all this free content and all the work, volunteering work that is put in by presenters, by organizers. We can get a lot of value out of these sessions. Microsoft Reactor Toronto is an organization, a program by Microsoft here in different cities in the world, but including Toronto. They organize community sessions where people can present about different Microsoft technology topics. Take a look at their meetup and see if anything there interests you. And you will be able to download this PowerPoint deck along with the files that we are sharing after the session. Just a second, I'm curious to see if there's anyone unmuted. It seems that some people are unmuted, and it's doing a little bit of noise. Okay, now it's better. So I was saying you will be able to get this deck. There's links for my newsletter if you want to subscribe, because every month we send out a list of all the new features or improvements in Excel, and it's always good to be on top of that. Some recommendations for Excel books. We have here the YouTube channel for our meetup, my own YouTube channel where I post tutorials about Excel in general, many times related to Power Query in particular. So just take a look there. And there's also information about my training program where I teach how the techniques that I use to automate Excel, in particular reporting procedures, how we can facilitate all the flow and make the flow happen in less time instead of wasting countless hours with copy pasting and other meaningless actions in Excel. There's free modules as well if you want to check that out. So you can always give it a try and see if that works, if it is something that would be interesting for you. This is a tool that I also launched recently. It's a ready-to-use file that will allow you to have dependent drop-down lists in your Excel file. This one in particular that is showing is for three columns. So if you need dependency in between drop-downs, in between different columns, 2 or 3 columns, there's a ready-to-use file available for you. And that's it. So Solvent Excel Consulting is my business sponsoring this event. And enough talking, we have Mike Thomas with us from the UK. Thank you, Mike, for joining us. It is a little bit late over there, but so thank you for making the time to prepare and to present. I'm going to read his small short bio that we have on our Meetup page. In a career spanning of more than 30 years, Mike Thomas, a UK-based IT trainer, has delivered thousands of courses and produced hundreds of written and video-based tutorials. He is a subject matter expert in a range of technologies. His primary focus and passion being Microsoft Office, especially Excel, on both the Windows and Mac platforms, and also Power BI. In addition to training, he also designs and develops Microsoft Office-based solutions that automate key businesses, tasks, and processes. So we have an expert here with us today, a lot of experience, many, many years of experience. I didn't even know what Excel was back then, 30 years ago. So in fact, I'm quite new to Excel, I must say. So we are lucky to have your expertise here with us today, Mike. Please take the mic and the stage. Let us know what I missed from your presentation and show us what you got for us today.
Great, thank you, Celia. Hello and welcome, everybody. There's 1 or 2 names in the chat I recognise, so hello to everybody who I know and hello to everybody who I don't know. I will start by sharing my screen, although it's not letting me share my screen. It says,
oh, sorry, it's because I changed the meeting properties. I'll change that right away. I'll make you a presenter.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, you should work now.
So
I'm curious while Mike is setting up the stage, if you want to type in the chat, if you are a Mac user, only Mac or Mac and Windows or just Windows, it would be great just to have a sense of what's going on with our audience today.
Okay, I can't see the chat at the moment because
Yeah,
the way that Excel, the way that PowerPoint for Mac works is that it forces you to use the presenter view. You can't turn that off. So once I've gone through these few slides, I will be able to see the chat. But yeah, let me just run through a few slides to start with. First of all, it's not that late here. It's only 10:15. It would be 11:15, but our clocks haven't gone forward yet. But yeah, very quick overview about me. 30 years delivering IT training, as you said. The last 16 years I've spent at AstraZeneca in their IT training team. I'm a lover of Excel and Power BI. I've founded a website called theexceltrainer.co.uk. I have a YouTube channel. I delivered 3 sessions at this year's Global Excel Summit, and I've also delivered a few meetup sessions last year.
Nice.
So I've been working with Excel since 1994. And I've used a Mac in my personal life since 2006, but I do use Windows in my professional life. So I do have a kind of overlap of both. In terms of the target audience, I would say that this session is aimed at people who already use Excel and you've either bought a Mac or you're thinking of buying a Mac. Or maybe you've been forced into using a Mac. Maybe you've joined a company and they're Mac only. And you want to be able to use your favorite spreadsheet software. So that's who I'm aiming this session at. Now, one thing I will say, and I will start, it might sound like I'm starting with a negative, but one thing I will start with is what's missing. And I guess the biggest thing that's missing in Excel for the Mac is data model. There is no support for the data model. You can open a file that's got data in the data model. You can view pivot tables that have been created from data in the data model, but you can't put data into the data model. You can't amend or refresh a pivot table where the data's coming from the data model. You can't use cube functions. You can't use 3D maps. So basically anything that relies on the data model, there is no support for that. Very much like Excel Online. Now, whether Microsoft will ever put the full data model into Excel for Mac, who knows? Okay, so if anybody does want to contact me, there's some of my contact details. I know Gronyu was going to put them into the chat as well. I just thought I'd put them up at the beginning rather than jumping backwards and forwards through slides. So I'm going to come out of this. I'm going to close PowerPoint and go into Excel. So I just have a look at questions. So Marty is a Mac user but hadn't switched to Office for the Mac.
So while you are switching, I can go through the chat here. So I have pretty much never used the Mac in my life. By Lee. Jeff says Mac only. Poami says Mac. Kay says both. John says Apple iPad. Marty says I am a Mac user but haven't switched to Office for the Mac yet. But he's been using Office on Windows. And Lee says, I'm interested in case people ask me about spreadsheets and they are using a Mac. Yeah, so anyone who is doing Excel work for other people can come across this situation of having to deal with Excel Mac users.
Exactly. One thing I will mention before I dive into Excel on the Mac is parallels. So if I just bring parallels across here, this is Parallels. It's a Mac application. It costs, you can either get the standard edition, which I think is £90 as a one-off, or you can get a subscription with the Pro edition for £100 a year. That's UK pounds. Not sure what the dollar prices are, but if you go to parallels.com, you can get all the details. And what Parallels allows you to do is it allows you to run Windows on a Mac. So it runs, it's a virtual machine, it runs in its own window, as you can see. I have it running pretty much all the time on my Mac. So if I do need to do anything on Excel for Windows, I can just switch over to Parallels, and I can just it's just a Windows machine. There we go. So if you want the best of both worlds, if you want to run Excel for Mac on a Mac, but you also want to run Excel for Windows on a Mac, then invest in Parallels. You will need licenses, but I guess if you've got Office 365, you're going to be covered. It's going to use one of your licenses up, and you will need a Windows license. Okay. So
is it? Sorry to interrupt you. Will it use one license, or you can just log in with the same license, but it will consider it a new device?
It uses up a license.
Oh.
So if are you talking about Office? Yeah, if I went to office.com and I looked at my account, it does use one of my installs. So I think you get 5 or 6 installations with.
Yeah, so that's one of the installs, not the license itself.
Not
Although for Windows you will probably, I'm not sure. Yeah, so this is always so complex, the licensing.
Yeah, it will. It'll use one of your installations.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but
Mike, I have Jeff asking your question. He's asking, is the seminar focused on 365 page version or enterprise version of Excel, or does it matter?
It doesn't really matter. I mean, I have got 365 installed on here. I am going to show you Power Query, but I think Power Query is now in general release, isn't it, for the Mac? So no, I wouldn't say that it's the enterprise version. It's the 365 version.
Is the personal account version. So the enterprise is Mac Office E5 or Office E3. That's enterprise. And then we have, anyways, like I said, licensing and subscriptions, and it's so difficult. It's a difficult matter here with Microsoft. But I guess anything Microsoft 365, it does not matter if it is a company, a business license, or if it is a home or personal license, as long as it is Microsoft 365.
Yeah, from a demo point of view, from a functionality point of view, what I show you today, it shouldn't make a difference. Shouldn't make a difference whether it's enterprise or whether you're using a home edition, if you like.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to open up Excel, and it's opening up on my other screen, drag it across, and just start a new blank workbook. The first thing to mention is on the Mac version, you've got two menus. So you've got the ribbon menu, which everyone's going to be familiar with, just like the Windows version. But you've also got this menu up here, because pretty much all Mac applications have a fixed menu up at the top here. A lot of the functionality is duplicated from these. There will be some functionality that is only available on these menus up here. To be honest, pretty much everything apart from File New and Excel Quit, I tend to use the ribbon menus or the buttons or the keyboard shortcuts. So I tend not to use a lot of these fixed menus up here. So that's one difference that you'll notice straight away is the interface. The second thing you'll notice is that when you go into the options, which you do with file, no, you don't, you do with Excel preferences. So Excel preferences, they're grouped differently, and I think there's a lot less options on the Mac version compared to the Windows. So when you go on Windows to file options, there seems to be a lot more on the Windows version compared to the Mac version. That's just something to be aware of. Also, if you want to customize the ribbon, and who doesn't, on Windows, you can go to the blank space over here and right click and customize the ribbon. On the Mac, you have to go through Excel, preferences, and then ribbon and toolbar up there and customize it that way. So they're only small. These things are only small little differences, but they can catch you out. I mean, Lee said something about wanting to know about the differences. So that if somebody asks you, and if you're helping somebody, if you're providing support, or if you're running a training course, and somebody says, how do I customize the ribbon? And you go over here and you right click and nothing happens, you're going to get frustrated. So there are a few little differences there in the behavior. Okay, just see if there's any other questions. I assume Excel on the Mac supports dark mode. That is available on the Mac. I think it does, yeah. I've never actually changed to dark mode. I think you might have to do it directly through the settings of the Mac, and then it will change it for all the applications. So Marty, to be honest, I've never done that. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to close this file down, which you can do with Command and Q, which is the keyboard shortcut to quit the application. And I'm going to open up the file called dates, symbols, colors. And I'm happy to send these files through to you, Celia, so that people can play around later. Okay,
Thank you.
so what I've got here is just a bunch of dates, nothing special, they're just dates. But you'll notice that it's included the day name as the default date format, which it doesn't on Windows. And they're formatted as long date. So one of the things that frustrates me, and I guess it's because I'm also a Windows user, is I'm not used to seeing the day. And I just think if you don't want to see the date, it takes up too much space. So of course you can go in and you can change the number format, choose a different format. But what I want to do is I want to go and change, change the default format for dates. And you have to do that through the system preferences. So if I run the Mac's system preferences and I go to date and time, and I go to open language and region, and I go to advanced, and I go to dates, you'll notice that long date hasn't actually got the day. So despite the fact that these appear to be formatted using Excel's long date format, it's actually using the full format. So if you actually just remove the day in this case, just highlight it and press the delete key, do the same thing with the comma, got an extra space in there as well, click on OK, then close this down. I think I have to close Excel down, don't think I have to save the changes, reopen the file, opening, there we go. Okay, so there we go. We've now got the long date format, which is the date format that we often, well, I certainly know and love from the Windows version. So that's another little workaround, another little quirk. It's something I've been asked about quite a few times, and that's what I've done in this session. I have some of the content comes from questions that I've been asked over the years. How do you do this? How do you do that? I'm switching from a Windows environment. I don't like the default date format. So just be aware that if you want to change the default long date format to not include the day, to use the Windows format, then you need to do it through the system preferences. Okay, so that's the dates. The next thing I'm going to show you is symbols. So of course, if you wanted to insert a symbol on Windows, I know you can use the emojis. I was showing people that today on a course with Windows key and full stop, I think it is. But not everybody uses those. And of course, on Windows, you can go to insert, you can go to symbol, but then you have to know what font to use, and you have to scroll through the list of symbols, and you've got the ASCII code, etc., etc. So it's all a bit sort of manual and messy. What if I wanted to create some kind of chart like this with maybe smiley faces? So what I've actually done over here is I've inserted an emoji, and then over here I've used the REPT function. If anyone's not familiar with the REPT function, it's an Excel function been available for years, which will allow you to repeat a character a certain number of times. So I want it to repeat the character that's in N1, which is that one there, and I want it to repeat it, in this case, based on the number that's in B7. And when I copied the formula down, then it takes the same cell, N1, because I made absolute, and replicates it 8 times, 6 times, etc., etc. So if anybody wants to ask about the REPT function, if anyone's not familiar with that, feel free to do so. But basically, it allows you to repeat a character a certain number of times, and people often use it for creating these kinds of visuals. So how did I get?
Yeah? Okay, sorry. No, I was going to ask you that. Sorry, I thought you were moving to the next one.
So how did I get that character in there? So what I did is I went to N1 and I clicked on Insert and I clicked on Symbol, and it automatically gives me all of these symbols. A lot of them are emojis, but there's all the other symbols as well. I just think this is slightly easier than Windows. So I'm going to pick the emoji. I'm going to go to Smileys and People, and I'm going to pick the one with the sunglasses on. So double click that, it puts it in the cell, close that, press enter, and there we go. Okay, so that's how to do that. I just think it's easier when you do insert symbol to get your list of emojis, rather than messing around with the Windows key and the full stop and so on. Okay, so over here, I want to get it to put one of two symbols in based on the overall score average. So I've done an average function to work out the average of those. And over here in N2, I'm going to say insert symbol, and I'm going to search for thumbs up and select that one, and then enter. Double click on that and it puts it in, and close that and press enter. Why hasn't it put that in? Let me try that again. Thumbs up. Why isn't it adding that one in? There we go. I needed to pick it up from there. It seems to have put two characters in there. Try that again. There we go. Strange. Let me edit this. Still giving me that. Okay, it doesn't seem to like that. Clear that. Double click that. Still not liking that. Okay, let's try a different one. Let's use a smiley face. Something's not working right here. Is it the font? No, it's not the font.
Will it do the same if you edit enter on the bar? Instead of editing the cell, editing from the formula bar, would that do the same? That's the same.
Yeah, okay. Well, basically, all I was going to do was put two different symbols in there and then just use an if function to say if the value there is greater than 7, pick up the contents of that cell, otherwise pick up the contents of that cell. So I just wanted to show you that you can use the cell contents in other ways as well, in if functions. Okay. So that's another thing you can do. You can fairly easily insert symbols. Another thing I want to show you is the color picker. So
can we ask something about the emojis before you move over? Move ahead. There's a question there by Marty asking if he would open this spreadsheet on a Windows, would the emoji be the same?
That's a very good
appear
question.
The same.
So let's try it. Okay, let's bring across parallels, drag that file in there, and open it up in here. It should do.
I guess so.
Yeah. Okay. It's not brought the color across, but it does seem to have brought the actual emoji across. So yeah. Yeah. Okay. I wonder if I can change the color.
I think it has to do with, you can change the color of the font, but making colorful emojis, I think, has to do with the version of Excel.
Yeah.
So sometimes on the web is different from desktop, and desktop, for example, if you go to Excel 2016 or something like that, it shows differently.
Okay, so I hope that answers the question.
Thank you.
All right, let's minimize parallels. Okay, so I'll go back to date symbols colors and go and show you the colors. Okay, Mac OS, the operating system, has a color picker built into it. It's very much like the color picker on PowerPoint for Windows. Why they didn't add the color picker to Excel for Windows, I don't know. But let's say I wanted to format all of these cells, the background of all of these cells, with this color here, this green. Now this is a graphic. So what I will do is I will select those there, and I will select the background color. I will go to more colors, click on the color picker, click on or hover over the color I want, and click on OK. If I wanted to pick up, say, the background of this to use the text color, I'll select the cells, go to the font color, go to more colors, click on the dropper, click on the color I want, and click on OK. And now it's applied the text color to those cells. Let's say I wanted to set the color of vanilla and the currency, the amount, to be the color of this ice cream here. So select those cells there, and I will change the background color for this one. So go to more colors, click on the dropper, hover over that color of ice cream, and click OK. There we go. And let's say for what we got, mint, I'll select those, more colors, click the dropper, click on the color, click OK. Let's say I wanted to reuse those colors. So let's say I had a lot of spreadsheets where I wanted to reuse this particular color. What I will do is I will just go to the color palette. I don't have to actually apply a color, but I can go to the color palette, pick up the color, let's say this one here, and then drag that and drop that onto the palette. So you can drop these. Yeah, I can drop any of these onto the palette. And the great thing is, once you've dropped them onto the palette, they're actually available in any application on the Mac, not just in Excel. So it makes it really easy to have your custom colors available, across the board, as it were. So that's a nice feature. That's something that I quite like. Okay, do we have any other questions? See any there? Okay. Color picker would be so useful, Lee. Yes, definitely. Yeah. Okay, so I've shown you there so far symbols, dates, and the color picker. So I will save this file and close it down and show you pivot tables. Okay, I'm assuming everybody's familiar with creating pivot tables, but there's a few little gotchas here that I'm going to go through. So I'll just open up, start with pivot tables 1. Okay, so I'm going to create a pivot table. I'm just going to dump it over here. So insert pivot table. There are slight differences in the dialog boxes, but I'm sure seasoned Excel users will be easily able to get around those. So where do I want the pivot table? I'll say existing worksheet, and I'll just dump it here. And I will drag order date into rows and revenue into values, and then create another pivot table. So go back to the data, insert pivot table, and again I'll just put the pivot table over here, that'll do, and drag order date into rows and revenue into values. So I want to change this pivot table to show quarters. So if I right click and go to what's the grouping, go to group and say I want to group by quarters. It changes both pivot tables. I'm sure that is something you've come across before. That is the case on Windows as well as the Mac, and it's all to do with the pivot table cache. So basically, when I created this pivot table, because that's the first pivot table I created in this file, it created a pivot table cache, which is basically a copy of this data stored in memory. And then when you refresh the pivot tables, if this data gets updated, what it actually does is creates a copy of this data. And if this data changes, the data in the cache gets updated, and then the refresh is actually pulling the data from the cache, not pulling the data from the cells. According to Microsoft, it improves performance. The downside is that if you then create a second pivot table, a third pivot table or fourth pivot table from the same data source, it's actually creating this pivot table from the cached copy of data. And again, that sounds great that you've got multiple pivot tables and they update really quickly because they're pulling the data from the cache. But the downside is if you do any grouping, particularly with dates, then all the pivot tables get updated and changed. So you can't have this showing revenue by month and this showing revenue by quarter. Now, there's a couple of ways that you can get around that problem. If we have any Windows users, and I'm sure we have Excel for Windows users here, just put in the chat how you would get around that problem. How would you get around that problem of being able to have two pivot tables, one showing revenue by quarter, one showing revenue by month? Anybody know how to get around that problem? So somebody says a separate cache. How do you create a separate cache? Well, the way to create the separate cache in Windows is to use the pivot table wizard. The pivot table wizard was a feature of Excel that was there for many years. I think pivot tables was added to Excel in 2007. So from 2007 to 2013, I think it was, you had the pivot table wizard, which was available on the tools menu or on the data menu, and it's still available on the Windows version, but they removed it from the Mac version. So if you would have used the pivot table wizard to create a separate cache, you can't do that on the Mac version, unfortunately. So the other way that you could create two pivot tables, one to show revenue per quarter, the other to show revenue per month, would be to put the data into the data model and then create your pivot tables, because the data model doesn't use the cache. Problem with that, the Mac doesn't support the data model. So this is the way that I do it. And this way actually works on Windows as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete both pivot tables and I'm going to convert this data into a proper Excel table. So just Command and T, just like Control and T on Windows, Command and T on the Mac, and click OK. So we have a proper table. It's called it Table 1, as you'd expect. You can rename it if you want to. And then I'm going to insert a pivot table based on Table 1. And stick the pivot table somewhere, doesn't matter where, and then build the pivot table revenue by month. Then I'm going to convert this back to a plain range. So table, convert to range. It doesn't mess this up. Then I'm going to convert this range back to a table, Command and T. Okay, it calls it table 2. It doesn't matter what name you give it. I'm going to leave it as table 2. And then I'm going to insert another pivot table based on table 2. Stick it somewhere down there will do. Drag in order date, drag in revenue, and then right click on one of these cells and group by quarter. And so now we have what we need. One pivot table, revenue by quarter, the other pivot table, revenue by month. That works on Windows, as I said, but that is the only way that I've found to do that on the Mac. And if any of this data changes, what I love about this is if any of this data changes or you add more rows, even though this table is called table 2, and that pivot table is based on table 2, and that pivot table is based on table 1, which no longer exists, that will update as well. So if I go and change one of these revenues to something really large and then do a data refresh all, both pivot tables update. I think that's cool. Don't know what to do.
That was a tricky one.
You've not heard of that before, Lee? Yeah, it's a nice workaround, and as I said, it works on Windows as well. It's certainly faster than using the pivot table wizard, which is hidden, and you've got to add it to your quick access toolbar. Okay, next thing to show you then. Close this one down, save it, and open pivot tables 2. So the next thing I'm going to show you is a unique count. So what I've got here again is just a range of data and a simple pivot table. And because I've dragged the customer into the values and the customer column is text, it's defaulted to a count. So it's showing how many records there are for each store. So it's counted 3 there, and it's counted 3 there, and it's counted 6 there. So it's just a standard pivot table. But what I actually want to do is I want to do a unique count. If I go over to here, I've already set it up, so I'm just going to show you the result of it. I actually want to say, well, yes, there are 12 rows of data. There are 12 transactions, 12 sales transactions, but actually there are 3 unique ones for Atlanta, and there are 3 unique ones for LA, and there is 1 unique one for New York. So in other words, what I want to do is I want to combine the customer and the store location and count the number of unique entries, not the number of actual entries. There is a subtle difference. Now, if you were doing this on Windows, you would just, when you build your pivot table, when you do insert pivot table, or this is how I would do it anyway, I would tick the box that says add to the data model, or I would have the data in the data model anyway, and then I can use the distinct count function to get the unique count. But because you don't have that functionality built in on the Mac, you've got to do it a different way. So what I've done is I've added this new column called count. And what this new column has is a formula in it. And what the formula is doing is it's doing a count if s. So it's counting the number of times the value in C3, or the value in column C, well, C3, C on that row, is in column C, and how many times the value in B appears in that column. And that formula has a 1 divided by that formula. So it's 1 divided by that formula, and dividing the formula into 1 gives us fractions. And then when the fractions are added together, that counts 1 entry for each customer. So adding all those together gives us 1, adding all those together gives us 3, and that gives us 3. Okay, so that is the only way that I could find to do a unique count.
Nice.
Questions on that? Okay, let me see this question from Marty. I'm wondering if you've dealt with clients that said we want to switch from Windows to Mac, and were they successfully migrating to Excel for the Mac? They require a major recreation of the spreadsheets. I haven't come across many people who've needed to do a major migration of spreadsheets, Marty. I think I've been lucky in that respect. So I think a lot of customers that I have got fairly basic requirements. I think the ones that have had the problems have been the ones where they've been using the data in the data model, because the data model doesn't exist, as I said at the beginning. So I think that's the biggest problem. I'll give you a little story. As I said at the beginning of the session, I have a day job. I work for AstraZeneca in their IT training team, and my boss pinged me one day and he said, I've got this CSV file. He said, and I'm trying to import it into Excel through data, through Power Query. He said it's just not loading. It's coming with a message, not enough room. I said, how many rows of data have you got in this CSV file? And he said, oh, about 1.5 million. I said, well, there's your problem, because you've only got 1 million rows. I said, what you need to do is stick it in the data model. He said, problem is I'm using the Mac. So I said, oh, well, switch to your Windows machine, and you can do it. So I think, Marty, that's where the biggest challenges come for me. But apart from that, I think most people have been okay.
Another thing that I could add to that, it only happened to me once, because very rarely I have to deal with clients with Mac, and this was with VBA. Have you ever come across differences in VBA for Windows and Mac?
I'm going to talk about VBA shortly.
Oh, okay. So
I'll come on to that. In a minute. Okay, so if I come out of this one, let me show you another little gotcha with pivot tables. Okay, so I want to filter here. I've created this pivot table, which is based on this data, and I want to filter to display just the flavors where the revenue is greater than 30,000. So if I click on the revenue, click on the drop down there, you'll notice here we've got by value. So I could say greater than 30,000. You don't have to click OK. So on the Mac version, slight difference, you don't have to click OK to apply the filter. It does it automatically. So that has worked. Okay, no problem. And I'll clear the filter. Now what I want to do is I want to show just the flavors where the number of liters sold is greater than 5,000. So click the filter button, by value greater than 5,000. What it's done is it's applied the filter to the revenue column. You do not have an option to apply a numeric filter to anything except the first column. So it appears that there is no way to apply the 5,000 to the number of liters column. If I was to choose, say, greater than there, that's still going to apply to that revenue column. So that's I think that's a little bug. I can't think of any other reason why you wouldn't be able to do that. So it's basically not allowing me to create a greater than, less than type filter on anything except the first numeric column. So the way around it, have I cleared the filter? Yes, I have. The way around it is to click just to the right of the pivot table, go to the data menu and click on filter. If you actually click in the pivot table, the filter button is grayed out. But if you click to the right of the pivot table, the filter button becomes available. Click on the filter button, and now each column heading has a filter arrow, and then you can apply the filter like that. Okay, you can do that in Windows, but it's the only way to get that kind of filter on the Mac. Okay, so nice little workaround for a little bug that Microsoft have thrown in there. Okay, so that is pivot tables. The next thing I'll do is charts. Okay, there's just a few little bits on charts. So I'm going to go back to pivot tables 1. And I just need a basic chart. I'll do it from this pivot table here. So click in the pivot table, go up to insert, and I'll just create a column chart. That'll do. Okay, so there's my chart. Obviously the problem here is I made January really, really big so that I could illustrate before updating the pivot tables. Anyway, couple of points. First point is that you don't have the little icons, and this applies to any chart, not just charts built from pivot tables. You don't have the little icons over here. So whenever I say click on the green plus and somebody's on a Mac, it's like, what green plus? So if you wanted to add any elements to that chart, you'd have to go up to the the design menu and add chart element. Okay, it's quite similar to the Windows version, but obviously there are some slight differences here in the interface. So that's one thing, no green plus. The second thing is, and I would say this is a benefit, is that when you build a pivot table, when you build a chart from a pivot table, you don't have the little grey buttons or boxes, because, you know, who keeps those? I don't. I get rid of them. You know, the one up here and the one up here. And I remember showing, I was doing a pivot chart session, and I said, we want to get rid of the little grey boxes and the filter down here. Said, so let's go to analyze buttons, and somebody said, I haven't got that. And then I realized that they were using a Mac. So that's just something else to be aware of, that those buttons on there, which I think is a blessing, actually. You may have a different opinion on that. Okay, so Celia says, does Mac have charts and pivot charts? Well, it certainly has charts. Do you mean insert pivot chart? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, so I see there in pivot chart,
Yeah.
because on Windows it's different types of charts, right? And I think pivot charts are always associated. I'm not sure about that, but my understanding is pivot charts are associated with the pivot table, right?
Yeah.
And charts can be built out of a range, just with
data.
just a range with data.
Yeah. And that's exactly as it is. It's the same on the Mac as it is on Windows.
So those buttons, there's the filter, expand field buttons and contract on the charts, or on the pivot charts. And then we have those gray buttons. Anyways, never mind. Carry on. Sorry.
Ones I'm talking about. They're the ones I'm talking about, the little grey buttons.
Those are for the pivot charts, but you inserted a chart, but you inserted from a pivot table. So I wonder if that was the same thing or a different thing.
No, if I insert a pivot chart, you get exactly the same.
Yeah, you get the same. No ugly buttons.
I think it's just habit with me. I always, even if I just want to build a chart from a pivot table, I just click into the pivot table and I do insert, and then I just choose the type of
chart type
going to there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it matters which way you do it. Okay, so the next thing I think was VBA, which you mentioned. So let me just I think on the whole, VBA on the Mac is very similar to VBA on Windows, but there are some differences. In fact, I was going to say I want to start this demo on Windows, so I'll shift over to Parallels in a minute. One of the problems is that ActiveX is not supported. So I always tell people, if you're going to add any form controls, drop downs, buttons, etc., and you know that the file might be used by Mac users, don't use ActiveX because it's not supported on the Mac. It's a Windows only technology. So if I just bring across Parallels and just drag this VBA file in and just open it. Okay, I've got two buttons here. That is an ActiveX button. So I inserted it by going to Developer, Insert, and added it there, the ActiveX control. This one is a standard form control. So I added it by going to Developer, Insert, and use that button there. So if I click that button, it does something. It just displays a message box. And if I click that button, it does something. And if I go to the Developer tab and I go to the VBA editor, I've got a form that I created. So in here, I've got a form section, I've got a user form. I can display that user form in the way that it would appear to end users. I can click the buttons. It doesn't actually do anything. So, you know, if I type Mike and click OK, it doesn't do anything, but it's a fully functioning form. Now, if I then open the same file in Mac, apart from the fact that it says open as read only because of the ActiveX button won't work. It's not clickable. That button is clickable and that works. But if I switch to the VBA editor by going to Developer Visual Basic, there is a user form there, but nothing is displayed. User forms are not supported on the Mac. So yes, it will show you the user form, but there's no way I can see the code behind it. There's no way I can see the interface to make changes. I can't even insert a user form. So if you didn't have a Windows machine, you can't even insert a user form from scratch. I know people talk about, is VBA dying? I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. We talked enough about that at the conference. But you know, this is VBA is still going to be around for years and years and years to come, and creating user forms for certain applications is a critical thing. I am currently building something for somebody at work which relies on user forms. It runs the whole thing I'm building runs on user forms. So that's a little bit about VBA on the Mac. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Celia. I know you mentioned it.
So a couple of things I remember was, for example, the file paths. I don't know if that still happens. I think that has been changed. This was back in 2017, maybe. And a file path on a Mac had the backslashes, so not back forth slashes. I think it was. Yeah. It was the opposite. Is it still like that?
I think it is. I've had real trouble with that. I've written something that involves file paths, and I think what I had to do in the VBA code was create an if statement to say, if it's Mac OS, then do it this way, otherwise do it.
I think another way that I found at the time was to use, instead of using the backslash or so specific character to separate folders within a path, I think there's an application .separator that identifies the separator in the system. So, for example, when you write that bit of code that goes, if the last portion of the path is backslash, then or is not backslash, then add the backslash to the path to then concatenate with a subfolder or a file name. You can use instead application.separator, if I'm not mistaken, and that will put in the correct separator if you are running it on a Windows or a Mac accordingly to what you are using. That was one of the things. There were bits of code that every now and then would not work the same way. So I can't remember exactly what. We would have to be testing on both machines to ensure the code was running. Most of the VBA works the same. And then a tricky situation was with generating PDF files and writing them on a specific folder. So on Windows, you can select any folder with VBA and say, save these as a PDF on this folder. On Mac, at that time, again, this was in 2017 or 18, they had just released the equivalent to 2016 for Mac, I believe that then at that time. And at that time too, Mac introduced certain levels of security on their iOS system. And so with VBA, I was only allowed to write new PDF files inside a specific folder within the system, Mac system. So we could not write anywhere. We would have to go to that specific folder for Office, and there we were allowed to generate files. What's the name of that MVP? Ruben, not Ruben. Do you know that website, that blog and website that has a lot of VBA for Mac? I can't remember. I will find out and I can put it in the chat. That was where I found the.
Is it Ron de Bruin?
Yes, Ron de Bruin.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah, Ron does a lot of VBA. Yeah.
So his website is gold for whoever needs to work with Mac, particularly with VBA. He has a lot of code there that is specific for Excel for Mac. Those were the two situations where I found trouble there, but haven't had the not the luck, the opposite of having to deal with Mac a lot with VBA. So not much more.
How am I doing for time? Am I okay to carry on?
Yes, please. You still have some time. We still have maybe 20 minutes more if you want to.
Yeah, I'm happy to go on. Okay, the next thing I will show you, I close these down, is importing a PDF. Okay, so what I've got here is a PDF, which is not opening in the application I want to open it in. I'm going to open it up in Preview. So there's loads of applications on the Mac that can open PDFs, and I've got quite a few installed. Is there some background hissing noise?
Oh, sorry, it's me typing with the mic.
Okay, that's better. Okay, so yes, I'm going to open up a PDF and I'm going to open it up in Preview. Preview is an app that's pre-installed on the Mac, which can open up many different types of files. So it can open up images, but it can also open up PDFs. And what I want to do is I want to take just this data here and I want to put it into Excel. Now, if you're using Windows, and depending on which version of Excel you've got and which license type you've got, you may be able to use Power Query to import the data from a PDF. But the Mac, even though the Mac's now got Power Query, it has limitations, as I'll show you shortly. It's only available on 365, and it doesn't have support for importing a PDF. So having opened up this PDF, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a screenshot. So on the Mac, you can do Command, Shift, and 4. That's one of the key combinations that many Mac users know, Command, Shift, and 4. And what it does is it gives you a little crosshair, and you can then draw around the bit that you want to take a screenshot of. What that does is that creates a PNG file, which it will stick on my desktop there. It doesn't actually matter what the file name is, so that will do. And then I'm going to open up a new Excel file. Let's just start a new Excel file. And in this Excel file, I'm going to go to insert from picture, picture from file. I'm going to go to my desktop. I'm going to choose that screenshot and I'm going to click open. You may have seen this feature before. This feature, I think, has recently been added to the Windows version of Excel, possibly just for beta users. I'm not sure whether it's made its way into mainstream yet, and it has been around on Excel for iOS and Excel for iPadOS for quite a while. But what I can do is I can go through and I can review anything that it's not quite sure of. So it's not sure about that and it's not sure about that. It just marks those in pink. So I'll hit review and I think that's okay, happy with that one, so I accept it. And that looks like an I for instead of a 1, so I'll just change that to a 1, Q1, and click accept. And then insert the data, insert data, and what I have over here is editable data. So although you can't actually insert data directly from a PDF, if you can turn that PDF into a graphic, you can then use the functionality I've just shown you. There is another way that you can do this. So if I actually highlight the data in the PDF, I can copy and then I can go into Excel and I can paste. So that's another way as well. But the problem with that is it's a bit of a mess. It was actually easier to take a screenshot and then import the, well, bring the data in from the screenshot by using the insert from picture, because although we've got a nice little tabular layout here, it doesn't give us that nice tabular layout here. Okay, so that is one of the workarounds. That's one of the limitations with a workaround. If you've got data in a PDF, turn it into a graphic, and then you can just use the data, the insert from picture. All right, so let's close that one down. Right, the final area I'm going to cover is Power Query. This isn't going to be a full demo on Power Query. Obviously, you know, you could spend hours on that. It's just going to be a little bit of a taster. So I have a CSV file here. So there's a CSV file. It's just made up sales data. It's just opened up in a text editor, which I happen to have on the Mac. And I want to get that into Excel. So I will start a new Excel file. Why it's gone on my other screen, I don't know. Let's just start a blank file. And then go to Data, Get Data, Power Query. All of these ones here are some of the legacy, the old ways that you could get data into Excel from other systems. It was quite limited. It still is quite limited as to what data sources it supports. So data, get data, Power Query. This is what's currently supported. So you can bring data in from another Excel file, from a text file, JSON file. I'm not going to read them all out. You can see there. So I'm going to pick text or CSV. I want to hit browse and choose that CSV file in that folder and get data. And then click next and load. So it's now getting the data from the CSV file. just like it does do on Windows, and it loads the data in, creates a nice little table. Obviously, I need to tidy this data up. It's rubbish data. It's not in the right format that I need for my report. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to delete row 2. Now, if I deleted row 2, I could just delete row 2 in the spreadsheet. But the problem then is, if I get a new CSV file, so let's say I get sent a new file every week with the latest sales in it, if I want to update this, I just do data refresh all. It brings that line back, because all data refresh all does is says go out to that CSV file, grab the data, bring it into here and replace the data that's there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit the query. For those of you who aren't familiar with Power Query, whenever you bring data into Excel using data get data, behind the scenes, Excel creates a query, which is basically a set of instructions that initially tells Excel where that data is coming from and how to connect to the data source. But you can go in and you can edit the query to add your own actions, or steps as they're called. So I'm going to go to Data, Get Data, Launch Power Query. Opens it up in a separate window. I actually like the interface of this. It's actually a bit nicer than the Windows one. So it's got some nice big cogwheels there. It's got some nice proper icons there. It's got a nice big cross there instead of the little red one. I just think it's a nicer layout, a nicer environment. So if I wanted to delete row 1, what I would do in the query editor is I'd click Home, Remove Rows, Remove Top Rows, and tell it I want to remove just the first row, and click OK. And it's added a new step to my query. If I can make that panel bigger, there we go. It's added a new step to my query, removed top rows. If I right click on that, I can rename the step. And what that means is, for those of you not familiar with Power Query, when you're back in Excel and you hit refresh, it basically performs all of those actions. So it goes to the CSV file, grabs the data, loads it in, performs a couple of other actions, and then removes the top row. Let's say I want to change the order date to just show the date. So I will click on that column to select it, click on the icon to the left of order date, and change the date, the format of that column from being date time to just being date. And it adds another step, another action, and that will be performed during the refresh. Let's say I want to add the letters ICE, as in ice cream, because that's what this data is all about. I want to add that to the beginning of the order IDs. I click on the order ID column and say transform and format and add prefix. Type ICE dash, click OK, and it's done that. And I want to add a column for the profit. So I will click on the revenue column and I'll say add column, standard, subtract. Tell it I want to use the values in a column and choose cost. So what that's going to do is create a new column, because I said add column. It's going to create a column where it's going to take the revenue, because that's the column here that I'm on, and it's going to subtract the value from the cost. I want to rename that column, just double click on its heading and just change its name. So for anyone who's familiar with Power Query and the query editor in Windows, or maybe in Power BI, there's nothing mind-blowing here. It's very, very similar, but for anyone who has never seen Power Query before, it is an amazing wow moment tool. So let's come out of the query editor, home, close and load, which means close the query editor and reload the data. And there we go. There's our updated data set, all cleaned, all tidied, with an extra column. Alrighty, that I think brings us to the end of the session. So I've gone through, what have I gone through? I've gone through the interface, I've gone through preferences, I've gone through symbols, I've gone through the color picker, I've shown you pivot table differences, a little bit on charts, difference with the VBA, importing a PDF, and a brief overview of Power Query and the query editor. So I hope that has been useful. Thank you for coming along. Thank you for your questions. I will pass back to Celia to do whatever you want to do as you wrap up.
Thank you, Mike. It was very useful. I was just commenting there that the interface on Power Query for Mac seems to be a little bit closer to the one in Excel for the, not Excel for the web, I meant to say in a Power Query online, but in other tools other than Excel. So there are other tools where Power Query is available online, and the interface that they have available for in those tools is similar, or the Mac one is similar to that one, with those icons and other things. So the difference for Power Query is pretty much data sources, right?
Yeah,
Mike?
data sources I think is the main one. There's probably other differences.
And then those differences with the interface in terms of icons, the visuals, but functionality wise is pretty much the data sources that it can import from.
From what I've come across, there's no big differences apart from the data sources.
Mm-hmm. And these are differences that are major differences still, although they recently added new sources that were already available in the beta version for Mac and recently became generally available, but there are still Excel for Mac, Power Query in Excel for Mac still has limited data sources available when compared to Excel for Windows.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so thank you for showing us this, very helpful. Are there any other questions? Grania, do you see any other questions?
Excuse me. Yes, Lee said that she hadn't used Power Query on the web and she didn't realize it was possible, but she was asking, with all those extra things, is that just in Power BI that you get the Power Query on the web as opposed to Excel on the web?
Do you want to answer, Mike?
I don't know is the answer to that.
Okay, so I think from my understanding, Power Query in Excel for the web allows you to refresh only. Pretty much that's it. You can refresh queries and not all the queries. You can refresh queries from certain that pick up data from certain sources, SharePoint files, and not much more than that, I would say, or tables within the file. You can refresh them online. Other than that, you cannot develop queries in Excel for the web. So it's even more limited currently than it is for Excel for Mac. But there is Power Query online in other tools like the Power BI reports and what else? Data flows and other things that I don't work with them, so I cannot really talk about that. But there is other ways of using Power Query online that are, and that Power Query editor is in fact a lot more advanced than it is in Excel for desktop. They have the query dependencies, for example, with a lot more information, and functionality than we have in Excel for in Excel desktop for Windows. So hopefully they will bring everything. They will merge all the different versions into the more advanced one. But if they do that, I guess it will take a while, a long while. Okay. Any
I
other
think that's it for
questions?
questions. The rest of it seems to be comments about, great presentation and very useful presentation, which I must say I agree. It was very interesting
Yeah.
to see the differences.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Mike. Do you want to put up again where people can reach out to you if they want to, how can people find you?
Yeah, there we go. I'll just put it up in slide view. So there we go. There's my email address, website, YouTube channel, and feel free to link up with me on LinkedIn.
For sure. Okay, and take a look at Mike's YouTube channel as well. Mike has been pretty active there, and very nice tutorials and useful tutorials. Always a chance to learn from there. All right, so thank you again, Mike. Thank you everyone who joined us today live. It's always nice to have these questions, your comments, this interaction on the chat. Feel free to turn on your mic and your camera if you'd like to say hello to Mike. I will stop the recording now. Stop recording.
Well, I'm a bit jealous